My name is Becky Maley, and I'm the person in charge of reference and adult services here at the Marion County Public Library. And I'd like to welcome you today to our program with native West Virginia author John Michael Cummings. He is a native of Harpers Ferry. He has migrated to Brooklyn, but he has come back to his home state to do a tour to promote his book, The Night I Freed John Brown. It's his debut novel, and it has, as you can see from the board behind John, it has received rave reviews, wonderful critical acclaim. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand the program over to John Michael Cummings.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Becky. Here, feel free to pass it around. Take a good look at it. Well, thanks, everybody. This is a really great library to be in. I've been in a number of libraries now, and this one by far is the best. I mean, it's just really,
love to hear that.
it's wonderful. The posters, the bookmark out there, poster on the wall. And the fact that when I used the computer, my image popped up on screen too. So it's, it's a really John Cummings promotional central, it's wonderful. So thanks for coming. As Becky said, this is part of my tour, and I'm right in the middle of it. This is my third week. It's a 4-week tour that I set up all myself from Brooklyn, where I live. And from my little apartment with just a plain old phone, and I started making phone calls and set it up. I started in Jefferson County on April 17th at the Martinsburg Book Fair in Berkeley County, and I've been going ever since. 2 middle schools a day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and then a library in the evening and bookstores on weekends usually. And it's all just to promote the book. It's been exciting, really exciting. Kids are wonderful, and it just requires that I bring a lot of energy to the crowd, to the kids, and wake them up from their lives and talk them into a state of attention. And as long as I have a solid coffee before I go, I'm fine. So it's a caffeine life. In Brooklyn, I never drank so much coffee. So here I seem to be living on it. But the kids are great, and they usually have pretty interesting questions. It's the novel is set in Harpers Ferry, where I grew up. The publisher is Penguin Group in New York, where I live. And it took about 10 years to get it published. A lot of work went into it, revisions, and not so much a lot of research, but mostly revising it and working with the publisher and going through the protocol of it all, finding an agent, getting the editor, and just what seemed an endless task, and what really did seem to be an endless task. But it has come to an end. July 8th, July of last year, it was published, and since then I've been getting reviews, mostly on my own. My own effort gets these, and this tour I've set up on my own too, and I'm paying for it on my own as well. My wife and I are paying for it, and I'm happy to do it because I feel strongly about West Virginia, and I feel like West Virginia will make this book. I feel like if I didn't come to West Virginia, not coming to West Virginia would break this book, but coming here will make it. I have been very persuasive in reaching the West Virginia Library Commission and trying to help them see the importance of nominating it for the West Virginia Book Award, and a number of librarians have read it and really like it. And their last words to me was, we're watching you promote, and we're seeing how you do it. So they like the book, and so my job is to get out to all the West Virginia schools and libraries and try to make that reflect that kind of talk, to create a buzz about the book so it goes to Charleston and they get it to the forefront at the Library Commission. In fact, in October, I will be in Charleston at the Book Festival speaking about the novel, and at that time I'll try to visit 30 counties there. Right now this is a 25 county tour up through Hancock County. I started in Jefferson County, and I'll be finishing up in Hancock on May 15th. So it's a big push on my part to visit all 55 counties. Should I stand still?
No, you can move around.
Okay. And I'm happy to do it. Growing up in Harpers Ferry, people might think of it as kind of a Virginia/Maryland/West Virginia town, being so close. But in my family, it was just a West Virginia town. We had a kind of a rundown house in Harpers Ferry. Now, Harpers Ferry is a pretty well-known tourist town, and a lot of people from Maryland and Virginia come to Harpers Ferry to see the site of John Brown's capture. It's a National Historic Park, and it invites people from D.C. and beyond, Delaware, and up from North Carolina, all over. But to us, we were West Virginians. We had a dented car with an old West Virginia plate on it. There was nothing. Our house was run down, and we felt like when they came to town, the kind of stereotypical West Virginian. Like, here's the resident hillbilly. Now, I don't mean to use that word in a bad way, but I'm going to try to just explain where my heart is. These were pretty well-off Virginians and Marylanders that came to Harpers Ferry, and then they saw our house and said, oh, this must be, you know what? I mean, we have John Brown, and we have this family. So in our hearts, growing up in Harpers Ferry, we were really West Virginians. On our table, my mother kept Wild Wonderful West Virginia magazine, and that was like the family Bible. No one ever tore the pages. It was beautiful photography, and everyone kept it in good shape and respected it. And every year, our grandmother took us out into Pocahontas County, West Virginia, on the trips to see Seneca Rock and Bald Knob and Spruce Knob and Dolly Sods, all the sites. So we took kind of a southern tour. She ran a liquor store in Harpers Ferry, and one year she paid for the whole trip in silver dollars that she had collected from the... Now, this liquor store was an ABC store located near the town hall in Harpers Ferry. Now, my mother was a secretary of the town hall. My father worked below at the post office, and my uncle was in the maintenance department on the other side. So town hall in Harpers Ferry was family central for us. You had to know which, you had to avoid it. You had to take the back streets to get around it. So my grandmother would take us on trips into West Virginia, and she spoke so fondly of the state. There was such a passion in her voice and a kindness, and she really loved the state. And each year she'd take us to the Mannington Motel. Now, we had a kind of rundown house in Harpers Ferry. Marlington Motel, excuse me. Now, it's just an ordinary roadside motel, probably. But to us, it was like a king's palace. It had air conditioning, it had carpeting, it had light switches that worked, it had comfortable beds, it had a shower. We didn't have a shower in the house. We had an old bathtub that took forever to fill, and there was a leak somewhere, maybe a couple of them. So it was a perfect place, and that's what we think of West Virginia. You know, that to us, Harpers Ferry was bordering an ocean. Virginia and Maryland might as well have been the Atlantic. We did not go over there. It was a great expanse that we did not go there. We shopped back in Martinsburg, and our hearts and we belong back in the state. So it might as well have been the Land's End in a bigger way than just the Potomac or the Shenandoah that border it. To us, it was really the end. We certainly didn't belong over there. So I like to tell school kids that, and to let them know that I feel like a West Virginian when I come here. And but that I say because I would not put this effort into a Maryland or a Virginia schools just yet. You know, my first effort, which I want to be certainly my strongest and maybe my most heartfelt, and I want my first effort to be in West Virginia schools, not over in Maryland or Virginia, where I had a chance actually to visit a lot of Maryland schools around Harpers Ferry and Virginia. And I concentrated the tour solely on West Virginia schools because I feel part of the state. So I let kids know that, and they're pretty good about understanding, I think. But I think adults pick up on it much better. I think they appreciate it more. My mother, even though my book has been well reviewed in all these publications, she keeps asking, what about Wonderful West Virginia magazine? Has it been on bookshelf yet? It's not a book until it's been on bookshelf. And never mind Kirkus reviews or any of the others. It has to be there first. So for her sake, I've been pestering Bill Clements, who runs the West Virginia Book Company, about a mention of it. And he says, maybe, as most people, maybe. You know, it's always the intermediate hanging answer that I keep trying to surmount. Maybe, we'll see, we're considering. So as I go into schools, I start with that. I let them know who I am, and I try to make myself just appear human to them. And then I tell them a little bit about the book. It is largely based on my childhood there, but it is much fiction is involved. It's very heavily fictionalized. And in essence, it's about a boy with a really oppressive father, and he's growing up. Josh, who's 13 years old, is growing up in Harpers Ferry today in modern times in the very historic town down in the lower part. His father is very, as I said, oppressive, critical, cynical, all the worst adjectives that could be applied, controlling, unfriendly, goes on. And poor Josh feels imprisoned in this house in Harpers Ferry with no freedom at all. What happens, and I'll skip over just a little bit to kind of get you to the main nugget of the story. Even though he's meek and submissive in his real life, because he feels so beaten down by his father, he manages to take part in the town's annual play, which is a recreation of John Brown's trial. John Brown at his trial stood up very passionately and even eloquently and spoke to that end against slavery and pointing out the barbaric wrong of slavery. Josh, and that's a fairly famous speech, Josh is playing the role of one of John Brown's brave sons in the play. Now, John Brown's sons died by his side at the Harpers Ferry, the raid at Harpers Ferry, and Josh, meek and submissive in his real life, steps into the role of one of John Brown's heroic sons, and it transforms his life. It makes him empowered by the experience. At school, he stands up to the bullies in his life. He stands up to his father at home. So he feels as strongly about John Brown, even though he's poor and white in modern times, as the slaves did 150 years before him. So the whole idea was to make a kind of modern day parallel on the historical events at Harpers Ferry. Hi again. To create a kind of modern day twist on the events at Harpers Ferry, that anyone at any time can need liberating from something that's oppressive. So in one review they said that this is kind of a nice way of phrasing it. The use of history as a narrative tool adds a scope that is rarely attempted in the realm of young adult literature. That's kind of a nice phrase. I would just say that the use of history in this book is part of the narrative tool. Josh, in a sense, steps back in time. He travels back in time, and he steps into history and is drenching with the historical event and returns all the stronger for it, taking John Brown's message of all needing human dignity to heart, to his heart, and bringing to his heart a kind of fiery independence that he uses in his life. So that's a nice way of saying it all, but in most respects, the book was not designed this way. It was really an autobiographical book. In my life, I grew up with a very critical and angry father, and I grew up across the street from the John Brown Wax Museum, and out my bedroom window, I saw a very angry-looking figure of John Brown. It was a wax figure, and it's John Brown in his most ferocious moment, where he's lunging with a musket, and it's pointing right at the glass, and it's just used to startle tourists. It's kind of a teaser to bring them into the museum. And his face is all fiery, and his eyes are red, and his teeth are gnashing down out of his mouth, and his beard is long and scraggly. And my brothers and I, when we'd run across the street, whenever we could sneak out, we'd run across the street when the coast was clear, and every time we'd look at it, now, we weren't really afraid. We'd actually laugh a little bit, and every time one of us would say, "Looks like Dad." And that's what we believed. It looked like our dad. Now, in the novel, I've had our young hero afraid of the statue, or the figure. He has an angry father in his home, and out his window he sees an exaggeration of his own father, a caricature of his father, great grotesque enhancement of his father. And that's how he's set up in the novel. So I drew from my own experience of having John Brown in my life that way, not as the historical figure of John Brown, but as a kind of amplification of my father, cartoon of my father. So I used that as the basis of the book. I don't know that I really developed any symbolism. I was just writing about what was interesting in my life, when I wrote it. Now later we come back to apply terms like, wow, that's interesting symbolism you've created. And that works well, but it's kind of like that hindsight application of literary terms. They should be there anyway. The good writing would have these kinds of foils in it anyway, these kinds of elements of irony. And I don't think a writer thinks in terms of irony dramatic, or what's dramatic irony, or what's a symbol, or is this a foil, or is this a compliment to the father? So in my life, in my story, my novel, I was really just writing what I knew best, and that was the basic mindset there as I wrote it. So that tells you a little bit about the story and how I used my own life. And now beyond what I said about having the angry wax figure and my brothers and I laughing at it, much of it is fictionalized. In the novel, a wonderful family moves next door. Now they are just the opposite of Josh's family. Josh has a very narrow, fearful, shy family. Now this new family, the Richmonds, they are wonderfully open-hearted, free-thinking, very traveled, cultured. They love people. They love being where they are. They love John Brown. They just are the boy who's Josh's age, Josh is 13, and his new neighbor Luke, who's 13 as well, is just the opposite of Josh. He holds his head up when he speaks to adults. He speaks to adults as if he's an adult. He has total self-esteem. So for Josh, that alone is a wonderful new development. John Brown aside, just the fact that a boy can be exposed to a family that is so full of everything he doesn't have, in and of itself is a great treat to any boy's life. And so all these elements I talk about, symbolism in the book, if I just looked at the neighbors, the wonderful neighbors that happen in the book, that alone is kind of the value of the book. When we ask, so what? Is the book valuable in and of itself? What's the so what of the book? Why does it have to exist? Well, in this case, the wonderful new neighbors, that alone is a great thing to happen. Because any one of us at any time can have interesting neighbors. I live in New York, and my neighbors are always interesting, and they're always so different. And if I can communicate with them, that's wonderful. If we ever get on the same language realm, that's wonderful. So, but they're often bright-eyed and good-hearted, and they have a lot to say about the world, and they're happy to be in New York. And talk about highly very different neighbors in New York. And we all move among each other, and there's a level of immediate kind of neighborly respect. Now, it is a curt, brusque, short-tempered city, but in Brooklyn, where I live, it's a little different. That's where people live and have neighborhoods. So all around me, for example, one fella is from Pakistan, and he's always alarmed about the news. His family runs the pharmacy where we all go in the neighborhood, and he calls me brother when I go through the door. Hi, brother. He's so friendly. Sometimes he feels friendlier. He's friendlier to me than my own brothers have ever been. So, he's a remarkable man, and I don't see him as any different. I see him as just a nice guy from some far away place, but same, he's just me. He wants good for his family and good for himself. And so New York is it's an interesting place that really creates tolerance from the onset. We have to hold the doors for each other. We have to say thank you before we even know each other. As we're all bustling along, we're holding doors. Hi, thank you, and smiling. So before we know it, we're already at ease or working with each other in a kind of functional way as neighbors before we know anything about each other. So in a way, that is a very large example of what Josh experiences in the book, because this family is just the opposite of his, and they have different viewpoints, and he's very much drawn to them. He himself is an artistic boy, loves to draw, and he's drawn to the fact that the father in the novel is an actor. He's an historian too. Mr. Richmond has moved to Harper's Ferry in the novel because he's an historian, and the Park Service is wide and far at Harper's Ferry, so he's going to work as an historian, but he's also an actor. He likes to take part in town's plays and has done so over his life. Now, just an amateur, it's just something he does to enjoy himself, and he's got his eyes set on the town's play about John Brown, and he's got his eyes very closely set on the leading role of John Brown himself. So for young Josh, who's making friends with this exciting new family, he's going to see a lot of things differently. He's first going to learn that wax figure out his window is not his father, And he's going to learn that it's a full man. At present, as the book starts, John Brown is a silhouette of his father, kind of just a silhouette, nothing full, nothing fully formed, one-dimensional. As he befriends Mr. Richmond and the family and learns about the history of John Brown, that he had a family himself, that Brown was a farmer, that he spent most of his life, fairly unremarkable life, being as good as he could to others around him, was not calling for revolution for 55 years of his life. That his father was very religious, that he himself was very religious. And Josh is going to bring in all this information through this kindly man next door who would be the father figure, the father he wishes he could have. So there's a lot of father elements here. Mr. Richmond is very kindly and loving to his sons. He's kindly and loving to Josh. So Josh is wide open when he listens to him. He has no barriers. And then when Mr. Richmond tells him about John Brown's early life, he says, "Oh, that wax figure is not my father." Now I'm saying it all in a kind of different way than it develops in the book. It's much more subtle, and I'm sort of spelling it out with even edges to it, and kind of black and white. In the book, it's much more subtle, and it's driven by his curiosity. The book is his motivation to be happy is what drives the book, and we're following him, young Josh. Now, as Mr. Richmond gets closer to taking part in the town's play, in the role of John Brown, young Josh is going to witness Mr. Richmond dress up as the boogeyman across the street. He's going to see his kindly new father figure, the man he wishes he had as a father, transform into that wax figure that scared him all his life. He's going to put on the makeup, hold the musket and the bayonet, and pretty much recreate the wax. But he's going to go from wax to flesh. The wax figure is going to go from wax to flesh right before his eyes, into the body of the man that he admires so much. So there is a kind of psychological element, and Mr. Richmond's going to yell out, as John Brown, in the role of John Brown, "I would give my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice." He's going to roar it out just as John Brown would, in complete anger in his voice and all the ferocious expressions, and dressed up in the garb with the bandage around his head and the heavy jacket and the brambles and the mess of the raid on his body. And then Mr. Richmond's going to turn it off just like a switch. Just like that. He's going to turn off all that anger. It's going to drop out of his face completely, just like a light switch. He's going to turn to the boys, all of the boys, and say, "Pizza tonight, fellas?" So that is going to be a wonderful psychological experience for Josh in a subtle way. No, not heavy-handed. He's not going to say, "Oh, I get it all now. I've grown up." It doesn't work that way, but it's just steps toward making these silhouette people in his life fully rounded. And he goes from having a lot of silhouettes in his life, cardboard cutouts of people, to having pillars, rounded people. And in that sense, I feel it's a coming-of-age novel, not really young adult. Having been endorsed by a poet laureate, a Newbery Honor recipient, and a Pushcart Prize winner, I think they were speaking to that young adult, to the coming-of-age element in it. That's a real passage to adulthood. There's also a great mystery in the novel. Josh's father's childhood home is kind of a very creepy old house along the river. It's a shining, bright white house that stands really tall along the Potomac, upriver from town, and Josh is captivated by it. He can't stay away from it. It almost has a spell on him. He has to explore. He's searching for something in those old rooms that are empty. And this old house won't ever age. To him, it's like a beacon that keeps drawing him to it. And the house stays as pristine as ever. It's an old house, but to him, it's just glowing and full of life, and he can't figure that out. Well, later in the book, he'll discover that the secret of his father's anger is in one of those rooms. He'll discover why his father was angry all those years. And he'll discover then that his father is not one-dimensional like John Brown, not one-dimensional anger like John Brown, that he's fully dimensional like John Brown, and that his father had other hopes and aspirations in his life, and he wasn't always angry, and it's going to bring a reconciliation to them. So it has, history as a backdrop, the stage, the play, and then it has mystery, the old house, and then it's got the boys' adventure and what they do together, and it's got the family drama mixed in. And Mr. Richmond even manages to infuse the book with Shakespeare. So, and then there's a magical plant that's called Calmint. Now Josh is on a very passionate search to find Calmint because he believes, as his father once said as a joke, it's an old family story, that Calmint was a cure-all plant and that it could cure the ills of anyone. Now Josh will be searching feverishly for this plant in one scene in the book because he feels it will heal his family. So there's even that kind of mystical use of a plant. So that's those are the elements of the book, and that's can I answer any questions? Make anyone popping with questions or curiosity, or am I just filling the void with my voice a lot?
Well, it might be a tough one for you.
Not at all.
When this becomes a bestseller,
Oh,
what's your
well, these are fun questions. Are you kidding me? These are fantasy questions. When it becomes a bestseller, I may not think about a next book. No, I'm actually working on a book, and it's in my laptop, and I was just working on it when you came in. So I'm always trying to work on a new book. Yeah, it's I was quickly closing it out, trying to get it to shut down fast enough without losing anything. So when I'm in the hotel rooms early in the morning, 4 in the morning, I work on it, and I would work on it 4 in the morning in Brooklyn. That's my starting time. But I try to reward myself after the day of going to schools and speaking as sincerely and as honestly as I can to the students. I try to reward myself for that with writing the new book and working on that and staying connected. I'd be pretty unhappy as a writer and as a person if I couldn't stay connected with this new work. And so I have to, even if I'm just rereading, and just tweaking it here and there. But at least I got it along with me, and I know it's there. It's a little companion.
What inspired you to become a writer and to work on this particular novel?
Yeah, that's a great, super question. Well, in these middle schools, when I was their age, I was not a good student. I was a C- student at best. I liked to draw, but that was it. I did not like to read, and I did not like English or history. I was a reluctant student and a buoyant boy, as we see all around us. And in high school, it got even worse, a lot worse at Jefferson High School. In fact, I almost failed out of Jefferson High in my last year. My last year as a senior, I graduated 5th from the bottom at Jefferson High out of 250 seniors, 250-some seniors. My parents divorced around that time, and it sent just a wave of depression through the family. And anger and depression. And did I mention anger? Did I mention depression? And it just seemed to multiply, and it got into everything. And before I knew it, I was totally clouded over. My life was like riding a little VW Beetle with iced over windshield. And the heavy ice, I couldn't see where my future was in any direction. Nothing made sense. There was no clarity. So that's kind of like, there's a lot of young kids that go through that. A lot of, we can say that now, but at the time it was just my problem. It wasn't there, it wasn't anyone else. So I did graduate, and I tried Shepherd, and I did fail out. I did not do well at all at Shepherd. I was out in almost half a semester, and I was smoking the wrong thing. I was heading in the wrong path very fast, and had a real attitude and was angry all the time and didn't even know why. And that wasn't me. I was so lost to who I was, I couldn't get back to who I was. And it would take years, and I think maybe not to this day am I back to who I am. And that was 17, I'm 45 now. That's a lot of years. So I worked odd jobs after I failed out of Shepherd. I worked washing dishes, I painted houses, I moved to Florida, and I made t-shirts. I had some ability drawing, and I even made gravestones at a monument company. And I used a sandblaster to make gravestones. And my whole job was handling the whole monument grounds. Now, I didn't have to plant the stones, but it was just a little office, and I talked to the grieving people that came in, not grieving, but the survivors who asked for the stone. I wrote down the information. I did the layout using metal stencils and set squares and a drafting board. I transferred it to a rubber template, and then I pounded the template down on the granite, made sure it was adhered. Then I cut out very carefully using an X-Acto knife, letter forms. I powered up the sandblaster. I made sure it was working. I kept the water and the sand going through it, and I had wore heavy cotton coveralls, heavy canvas coveralls, and a welding mask. And I just sort of moved in this motion across the screen, the stone, holding the spray nozzle perpendicular to the stone. So as the air came out, it burst into the stone, keeping the letter straight in at a right angle and evenly. By going slowly, methodically back and forth, just like speed skating in place, almost. Speed skating in place by moving, swinging this way, and then down a little bit. And you can feel, as you know, you can feel that you're keeping it even. The letters were being evenly receding into the stone. And today it's automated. No wonder. And it probably was automated then. I think I had the last company that it was just a little mom and pa operation, you know. And but you know, that was a kind of a special job. I wasn't scraping plates at a diner. I wasn't scraping spaghetti off a plate. I was actually making something that was pretty important to the family and important to the person who it represented, and it became important to me. Even though I'm this kind of dumb kid who's lost, I'm still doing something important. So I felt differently doing it. You know, that was kind of a nice job, interesting. You know, when you go to cemeteries, sometimes the only thing you ever remember, I was at a cemetery recently in Harpers Ferry, looking at the stone of an old friend. And I'm looking at the letters, you know, and when we go to cemeteries, we look at the letters in the stone, and it's like a few words that are the last statement of their lives, or last reminder or evidence of their lives. I mean, without the stone, we may not know that they even had a place on this earth without looking in someone's personal belongings and seeing a photo. So the stones, these tablets, are amazingly important. And I was doing them. And that job kind of ended, and then I moved to Rhode Island, where I worked as an innkeeper in Newport. And I just was running an inn. It was a small one, not one of the nicer ones. And that was interesting too. I had to switch gears and be very personable. So all of this was leading me to an encounter with a wonderful woman that I fell in love with, and I followed her to George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and I talked my way in under academic probation just to be with her. Now, George Mason's a pretty nice school, and Fairfax is a pretty wealthy county in Virginia, and I had no chance getting in based on my high school transcripts. I had to beg my way in, literally, and I wasn't afraid to sob. And I got in, and I was happy to be in. And I stayed in, and I studied art. I got a degree in graphic design. But by 26, I was different. By the time I was about to graduate, I was a different man. I was getting a little burned out on art. I had a number of art jobs. And in Northern Virginia, the art jobs are not really, to me, they're very, I'd say they're very commercially driven. That's one way of putting it. And had become fairly uninspiring to me. But more than that, at 26, I could feel a kind of inner voice telling me that another big decision was coming in my life. And I was knowing to listening to these inner voices. And all of this was just about finding happiness. This whole book and writing and the jobs that I found, I was searching just for happiness, you know, that basically was lost, and all I wanted to be was fulfilled. So I chose, I had a degree coming in art. There was nothing I could do about that. But at the time, I just loved singing aloud in my car, driving around the Capitol Beltway at night with the windows up. And I was singing one type of song, one person's songs, Bruce Springsteen songs. And I'd sing them all the time, really loud, and they made me feel good. And everybody can sing and feel good. And we all have music that really resonates with us. And I think that was just the case of me. This was really resonating with me. And it wasn't his music, it was the words that I was so drawn to, how he was able to capture. He's really a poet. How he's able to capture in a few words such emotion about his life. And it so inspired in me the wanting to do the same with my life. He was really that inspiring to me. So I actually copied down his Bruce Springsteen lyrics, his lyrics, on a computer screen and tried to play around with them. This was my first real effort at writing at 26. I feel that my first effort was then with his poems. poem/music lyrics on a computer screen, and it all sounded very odd. It was not good at all. I mean, it just sounded like I was, I don't know, a drunk cowboy or something. It just nothing, it had nothing without him. But what I did know was that I still liked the idea of seeking that, and I had to kind of think about how I was going to do it. Now, I was using verbal language all my life. I've been speaking all my life. Like everybody, we're all such experts at speaking. I mean, we've used it all our life. We can order a hamburger, buy a pair of sneakers, get a job, move to another apartment, finagle with somebody, talk down somebody else, get a doctor's appointment. We're really experts at using verbal, oral, spoken language. And I was too. I'd gotten jobs. But I didn't trust, somehow I just didn't trust any of that with these precious emotions that I wanted to somehow bring into the song-like qualities that he was inspiring in me. I did not trust any of the sneaker language, sneaker and job and hamburger language, this conversational language. I put a kind of ban on it. I prohibited myself from using it. If I was going to write and try to bring these precious emotions out, I was going to learn it from the beginning and start all over, and I did. I studied grammar, books, heavy, thick books on grammar, books that were entirely devoted to parts of speech, really like it was a series, like a digest series, a couple hundred pages just devoted to the subject and predicate, which was really wonderful, and I was amazingly absorbed into it. It wasn't icky to me, it was fascinating. It was totally fascinating. I loved it. I was seeing almost language like a newcomer to the world, to this country, like a non-native speaker. It was almost like the spoken language was an old busted up set of tools that I could fix a lawnmower with, but that's it. And this new set of tools I could use to dismantle an aircraft engine with. It was a beautiful new set of tools that was infinitely varied, and I knew every caliber and every metric size, and I had every wrench and socket, and I could dismantle something enormous with it. And I'd studied grammar until I felt like I was fully proficient in English, in grammar. In fact, I went through a funny phase when I didn't speak at all unless it was grammatically perfect. I sealed my lips, and I went through strange hours, sometimes most of the day, without speaking unless I was sure it was grammatically perfect in my mind. People thought it was pretty odd, and I was.
Were you married at this time?
No. Who would put up with that? And if I spoke, I was sure that it was very eloquently put together. And it was just, I don't understand it, other than just a quest I was on. It was just a quest. And you don't really know it's a quest, you just know you're embarked on something that feels important to you. You don't call it a quest, you're just in the motion of doing it. So then my next step, my next desire was to earn money writing. And I couldn't do it with the Bruce Springsteen poetry, and that was unlikely. But I knew there were tons of publications around. Look behind you, all those newspapers and magazines. So I set my eyes on journalism, and I read and read and read issues of U.S. News and World Report. And I read back, and I went back years. And that was strongly advised to me by a mentor that I really trusted. She was a Harvard graduate in Fairfax County, Virginia. She couldn't be wrong. And she was telling me, if you want to learn journalism, read U.S. News and World Report. You'll get the pillars of it. You'll get the foundation. And I did, and because I understood grammar so well, I knew exactly what they were doing in these news articles. And after I read and felt like I'd reached the end of that little stage, I made mock articles that I just invented. I made mock news articles about a bank closing, a grocery store opening, maybe layoffs, I think even a traffic accident. I just created fictionalized news articles written in the voice of a journalist, in the style of journalism, and I printed them out in the column inches so that they actually looked like authentic articles. And I took them to the local newspaper, and I got a job using those. Now, he knew they were mock, and he was very reluctant, and this was the Fairfax Reston Times in Reston, Virginia. Pretty small, not the New York Times. I got a job for $5,000 less than everybody else. He managed to put me through the negotiations as well. He was quite good. Which $5,000 less than the other reporters at a little weekly paper is almost nothing. I mean, because they're getting nothing. This is 1985, and they're getting something like 19,000, 17,000 to start, and 5 less in that time period is nothing in that county. I mean, in a county where the average income is 3 times that much. So I was down to nothing, but I didn't care. I was just happy to do it. I learned later he was expecting me to fail out, and I'd be his assistant photo editor with my background. So he had everything pegged against me. He thought for sure he was one step up on me, but I managed to make friends with the senior reporters very quickly, and I learned the nuts and bolts. And pretty soon I was writing to 200,000 people in Fairfax County. Me, a guy that almost failed out of high school, did fail out of college, and had never had anyone point me in the direction of writing. Suddenly I have a readership of 200,000, so I felt pretty good. And I took this new composition, this new journalism, and I brought it together with my poetry, and I formed those narratives about using my own perceptions. As a reporter, I could only use facts, but as this writer at home, working on my own narratives, and I now had the command of English, I could bring in my perceptions. Me, I, my observations, and things were flourishing. That was just, the dam was bursting. Everything was gushing downstream wonderfully. And I got 75 short stories published over the next 10 years, following John Updike's model of a short story. All I did was read his, pretty much his and James Joyce's, and I emulated their writing style, their epiphany. They have wonderful short stories, start with a statement about the main character, and by the end there's a great dramatic reversal. So I pretty much stuck with that model, making sure my main character reached a reversal by the end, and they were being grabbed up by magazines. And that was wonderful. I felt again, wow, a person can really do something. It's just like Bruce Springsteen's songs. You can be born on the wrong side of the tracks and still ascend to something better. So his gospel-like music was coming true. But the next 10 years would be an awesome struggle for me. Incredible struggle as I tried to make the transition from the novel, or from the short story to the novel. It nearly broke me in half. I mean, everything else paled in comparison to that struggle. And the long and short of it is, I had learned language, learned story. And by story, I mean just plain old plot. Hard, fast-driven plot. Just replete with developments. In publishing a lot of short stories, they took the flourish of language, and they didn't require a strong plot. The university journals, they really admire and have a showcase of very artful writing. And if a story is airy and thin on a plot, that's okay, because they prefer the eloquence of language over any kind of nuts and bolts, action-driven story. And I had taught myself using John Updike's writing. So my self-taught outlook, my self-taught strategy was working in the short stories. However, I did not have a novelist mentor. I didn't have someone who wrote the novel that I really admired and I devoured in order to learn the mechanics of the novel. I didn't like John Updike's novels, and I can remember going like, why? I could not stay with them. Why? And I thought, this is a lousy break, because I really like everything else about his writing. How can his novels be so ungripping to me? I don't know if that's fair, but it's just the way I felt. So as I plunged into these attempts at a novel for over 10 years, or for the first few of those years, they were very weak and full of language and not much story. And the big lesson for me was how the bicycle pedals work. They each turn in unison. One is language and the other is story. And no sentence earns its way into the book unless it contributes to the plot. And it's a really, a two-pack agreement there, two-shoot contract. And that's what I learned in New York, when I moved there. That's really the hard lesson I had to learn over a number of years. They want you to buy this book because they want you to know that if you pay $20, it's going to be rewarding to you at the end. You're going to reach the end, and it's going to be entertaining and active, and it's going to give you something that adds to your life, fits into your life. It's going to be brisk but heartfelt. It's not going to drag on too long. It's readable. It stays thin. Chapters aren't too long. They want it to fit into your life. They want it to be a product that works in the age of convenience, and they're very good about that. And so their stories, their novels, are formed on that. And they also want you to care very much about the main character. They want you to have a great sympathetic regard for the main character right away. They work on everything they can to keep your interest, to be a page turner. That's so. In my short stories, lots of times the main hero was unlikable. So if I did that in a novel, wow. Many times agents, I can remember as I submitted these samples to agents, they'd say, I just can't, I can't care, I can't get into it. So it doesn't matter if, maybe he's unlikable, but real, he's just unlikable. So at least, talking about a first-time novelist, where there's more of a safe bet on things, make the character, the main hero, sympathetic. Agents love to spout this out. They walk around spouting this out to potential clients. Make me care, and they love to say that over and over. Will I care about this? And they just, 3 words and they've solved it all. Make me care, and they just love to say that on the phone. Because the writers call you, I really want you to represent it. And, have you made me care? So that was the big lesson. But as I've had a chance to say this though, in my earlier writing there was a pretension in me, an insecurity in me, and that forced me to elevate the language almost to a showy level, to being kind of showing off. John Updike, maybe he doesn't show off, maybe he's really that way, but when I write like John Updike, I'm showing off. I'm trying to impress you, because that's not me. And so I gyrated his style because of an insecurity in me, and I picked up on it. And it's very, very elevated, almost kind of supercilious language, kind of self-luxuriant that's been called. So the big lesson in me was almost like a lesson in maturity, in becoming humble. And the years of rejection flattened me out, took away any pretension in my life that I was having with the short stories. There's nothing like rejection and getting to be 35, to land in New York as you're 35 years old with a sack over your shoulder and that's everything you own. And when other 35-year-olds have children or a family or a house and everything, you have nothing but that sack over your shoulder, and you're coming to New York to get your novel published or to get a novel published. That's a very scary, humbling feeling to do that, and this is no time for any crap from yourself. Nothing, no time for faking it. This is it. This is the crossroads. Now, I guess you could be 45 and it'd be really terrifying, but it felt very terrifying to me to go there at 35. So that knocked me down a peg already. And the language that came later became more and more terse, sparse, spare, very eloquent, not eloquent, economical. In fact, sometimes not eloquent at all, but just very economical. In the past, in my short stories, I'd use 3 phrases when I could have used 1, because I thought it sounded better. And now, the sky is blue. There's no other shade. It's going to be blue. It's not any adjective for blue. No replacement for it. So it was a big trip in humility, basically, and becoming kind of, and also liking people. The hardship changed the disdain and the misanthropic trait I had in me of not liking, of being a little bit reclusive and standoffish. And now I feel like I definitely like people, which is all part of the evolution. So I don't know which came first, the book or that change. From just being a little standoffish and shy and insecure to being very honest and forthright with people as I speak and liking them for who they are. And I think that gives you a better voice, and people would want to read somebody who thinks that way and feels that way. Certainly that's enough to make a breakthrough book. So I try to tell young kids that, but mostly, you know what they want to ask? Where can I buy the t-shirt? Or after all that, they'll say, can I get a free copy?
That was my next question.
Have you met some students who are inspiring to be writers?
Yeah, some who really listen very closely and have some very interesting questions, and they surprise me. Has your father read this? They ask. Has it made you happy? if you had not grown up in Harpers Ferry, would you be a writer? Now, those are pretty good questions.
Yeah.
You know, some of them are really thinking, and you can see it on their faces because they're like this at me the whole time. And Harpers Ferry is a wonderful place to learn aesthetics, you know, to have a real appreciation of nature, that's for sure. But they often say the prerequisite for being a writer is having an unhappy childhood. So, I suppose, you know, having something to say, yearning to say something, is, you know, is probably born out of discomfort, probably more than comfort. So.
Did you invent the title yourself?
You know, we struggled with the title and went through a lot of different titles, and I did come up with that one. But again, I was thinking in terms of marketing. I wanted the word freed, which I thought was good, and John Brown is a nice word to have in the title. In the book, Josh is confronted at the onset with a kind of commercial icon of John Brown. It's he's stuck in wax, he's made of wax, and he's behind glass for the tourist to be startled by and then to snicker at, maybe tap the glass like, "You're not real," you know, something like that, kind of on display. Now, by the end of the book, Josh makes good use of John Brown's words from the past, from his message. So in a way, it feels like he's freed him from that corny commercial icon status and given him good use in the present. Yeah, so as you read the book, you'll see that there's a lot of people who are freed. So John Brown even becomes almost another name for the father, who has a similar like rage, has a rage in him, an anger, but his anger is for a different reason. So there are a couple people being freed here. So
Excellent.
yeah.
So has your father read the book?
If he read it, he'd never tell me, and if he'd never tell me. He's just a ornery guy. He's from another generation, I think is the best way to say it. They don't have to explain anything to their kids at any time. And kids are sort of like born trouble, and their mission in life is to contain them. And that's how they see it. And spare the rod, spoil the child. And not about affection, not about nurturing. There's no motherly instinct that would ever be revealed, you know, in my father. He's not a bad man. In fact, he's a very interesting man. He's very personable, and people like him. He's just one way with his children. And when you're young, you only see that one way at first. You know, I saw him not long ago, and he's the same guy, but toned down a little bit, and I'm seeing him from a different perspective a little bit. But I'm still his son, which means he doesn't have to explain anything to me, and whatever he says is right, and that's it, if he so chooses. And if he wants to talk, then I'm fortunate. But if I have opinions, you know, I better keep them to myself. Something like that.
You know, in my mind, if one of my children would write a book, I would be ecstatic. You know, to think that. I think writing a book is sort of like having a child, is it not? I mean, in many ways.
Well, yeah, it could be.
It's a creative process.
For certain, yeah. I don't know. Maybe that's a little far. I think having a child is a special beauty thing unto itself. How would I know? I don't know, but I would just guess that the book, from my experience, was a lot of tedious labor in finding the right people and getting the right connections. The writing is a beautiful act, and the idea of emerging something from yourself that's very powerful is, you know, it's like, I don't know what an orange tastes like. I know what an apple tastes like. And writing the book's the apple, but of course, childbirth, I don't know. So, but it could be, you know, it could be. Certainly.
What I wonder is, does your father see this as semi-autobiographical?
I'm sure he does.
See himself in that, you know,
I'm sure he looked
I have another friend whose daughter became a writer, and you know, many of the things that appeared in her stories were stories from home.
I'm sure he read the disclaimer. No
Oh,
person's
okay.
real in this depiction, or it's purely coincidental. Yeah, right. Yeah, right, Gene.
But he's just
Look
not
at-
going to tell you.
Yes, he's just not.
But he did read the book.
I don't know. I really don't know. My mother did. my mother, my kind, sweet, wonderful mother, born nurturer, just a beautiful person, wonderful spirit. And she read it and she looked at me and she said, I never knew you had such an unhappy childhood. So, again, they were reading it as autobiographical. And that's I did put in a lot of myself, but there was a lot enhanced, a lot made up, a lot of little fibs in fiction. I try to tell kids it's like telling sweet little fibs that work in the story. And then they kind of get it. When they say fibs, it's like, oh, okay, so I walked my dog and I did cause him to get off the chain, and I'm going to make sure in my little fib story that I find him again. So that's how they understand the departure from using your own life to fiction. Fiction and nonfiction, I think, are words that really are problematic, I think, unless it's clearly nonfiction and clearly fictional. But a lot of writers, literary writers so-called, draw from their own experiences. And so the fodder of it is real, and often they just change names and places, and suddenly, behold, we have fiction. Which is not much. I did not do much more than that in the book. J.C., Josh Connors, John Cummings, I intentionally and even devilishly flirted with the line between fiction and nonfiction. Niles Richmond, fictional. Neil Randall, he's the boy's hero. Neil Randall is his real name. And Jerry, the oldest brother, Joe, my oldest brother. And Robbie, the fictional middle brother. David, middle brother in real life. So not entirely, but I almost, with a mischievous streak in me, kept it very close so that the people in the inner circle would know who it was. It was also a wonderful journey for me to go back into my past with magnifying glasses or binoculars on and see Harper's Ferry from a kid's point of view, the kid I was. That was really a treat. That was a real treat to go back that way like this and to bring in all these observations through the mind and heart of someone who was very sincere, innocent, and honest. So it actually fulfilled a couple things. It improved my writing. At the same time, it gave me a great vehicle to sort of capture the way we live and to see it through the wonderment of a boy's eyes and the puzzlement of a boy's eyes. A novel, and it had my editor and I, Patty Gouch, who's had 30 years experience, never saw it as she hadn't never spoke in terms of young adult or / adult. She spoke in terms of writing a better story. So I didn't even know I wasn't even thinking of young adult. I was just following her lead, and it was all about keeping the chapters, not closing them off at the end, not making them episodic, not filling in the details, but keeping the reader wanting to find more. Just basic old suspense and curiosity, keeping that reeling along and having long threads and short threads in the narrative. Some of these long threads ran all the way to the end, and the short threads were snipped off midway or part of the way. All these kinds of trails drawing curiosity and characters whose motivations were not entirely explained. Why did he do this? And why did he say that? It's kind of seeding information, dropping information like planting seeds, and giving characters legs. And it's just a good lesson. It's like this book has a clean artery. There's no cholesterol in it. And I hadn't learned that. So, that really has nothing to do with young adult or adult. Not so much. That's just good. That's just writing a better story. A more compelling, the idea of page turner story.